Hi everyone, welcome to another video by ESL Fluency. In this video, we are going to talk about IELTS speaking, focusing on fluency and coherence, how you should answer the questions in each part of the test, and how long your answers should be. First things first, let's have a quick look at the format and types of questions in this module. Right now, IELTS speaking is like a face-to-face interview with a person called an examiner. The session takes about 14 minutes and has 3 parts. In part 1, you are asked personal questions about your work, study, habits, and things like that. They're familiar topics that should be easy for you to think and talk about. After that, in part 2, you are given a topic to talk about for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you start speaking, you'll have 1 minute to take notes and prepare. Finally, in part 3, you are asked further questions about the topic. This part is not about you, so you can't answer only using personal life. Your answers also need to be more detailed than the ones in part 1. So make sure you extend your answers. Now, let's focus on each part and dig deeper. Part 1. As I already mentioned, this part is all about your life. Your answers do not have to be long or extended like part 3. But the examiner also needs to have enough sample from you to rate accurately. So sometimes you might hear words like why. This means the examiner needs more for that question. It doesn't necessarily mean you have done a bad job. Asking why is part of the question sets they have. But when you keep hearing why for the same question, you should start extending your answers for the next questions to avoid being penalized for short answers. For band 7, 8, and 9, you need to show willingness to speak at length while being coherent as well. Let me explain this with an example. Imagine the question is, what is your favorite book? Here is how a band 5 test taker answers the question, and you'll see why the examiner kept prompting him to extend the answer. The Little Prince is my favorite. Why? Because it is good. Why? It teaches us a lot of things. See, the answers are too short and not extended at all. The examiner wants more. Here is a student with band 6 for his fluency and coherence score answering the same question. The Little Prince, my favorite, is my favorite book because it has a lot of things to teach, and it is a short book, so I read it in a day. As you can see, the test taker tries to extend his answers, yes, but he pauses usually for words, makes a lot of mistakes, and then tries to correct them. This doesn't mean you shouldn't correct yourself if you make a mistake, but if this happens a lot, well, that's a problem. Now you might ask, how can I work on this problem? You can work on your hesitations and pauses by having a good speaking partner during your preparation. The more you speak, the easier it will be for you to use the language. Plus, you also need to read books, magazines, and articles, watch movies, TV shows, and news broadcasts in English to absorb materials and learn vocabulary items. These activities also help you reinforce your knowledge of English grammar, which will help you think of them faster and use them more naturally while speaking. In short, you need to take advantage of all the opportunities to use English on a daily basis. Another way to work on your fluency is by watching a short video, taking notes while watching, and then using those notes to give a summary about what you just watched. This will also help you get used to speaking for a longer time, which is needed for the second part of the speaking test. Now, let's see how a Band 7 test taker answers the same question. The Little Prince is my favorite book because you can find a lot of wise words, and it is also a short book, so I could just read it in one day. Test takers at this level can produce long answers without effort. They may pause occasionally or self-correct, but it's not as bad as you see in Band 6. They can also use linkers well to connect their sentences. Now, Band 8 is all about little things. We are not talking about people who can speak with ease. They don't usually stop to think of words or grammar. Sometimes for ideas, yes. The Little Prince is my favorite book. I read it about 2 years ago and I was hooked after reading the first chapter. You know, it kinda tells grown-ups to think outside the box. It was just an eye-opener for me. In Band 9, test takers may also have occasional pauses for ideas, just like those at Band 8. But Band 9 responses are a bit more sophisticated and extended. Here is what I mean. Oh, definitely The Little Prince. It's my all-time favorite novella. You know, unlike other storybooks, it uses simple conversations to convey deep thoughts like our planet is vulnerable and that we should take care of it before it's too late. This is why the book can easily be understood by both adults and children. As you can see, there is no rule about how many sentences should be included in your response. It's all about the details and depth. Now, here is a question. Should you keep talking all the time until you are interrupted by the examiner? Well, some IELTS teachers say that it's a good idea, but that's not part of the rules and it isn't always a good idea. You just need to keep it natural. Sometimes doing that leads to more stress, pauses, and irrelevant points. Being interrupted by an examiner doesn't mean you have done a good or a bad job. It only means they just need to move on to the next question. As long as you answer the question and stay relevant, you're good. You don't have to be interrupted all the time to score high. Now, let's talk about part 2. In this part, the examiner is just a listener. You need to speak for 1 to 2 minutes non-stop. The topics are usually about describing a person, a place, an experience, an activity, or an object. Sure, almost everyone needs some time to think first. This is why you'll have 1 minute to take notes and prepare. Your cue card will have a topic and 3 other bullet points to help you generate ideas fast. But you don't have to stick to the bullet points in speaking. As long as you talk about the topic and stay relevant, you're good. So my recommendation is to add your own bullet points too that cover other aspects of the topic. For example, for this topic, you can talk about the lessons you have learned about the experience, what you are doing these days to avoid such an experience, and what you will do differently if something like this happens again. So, as you can see, you now have more than enough to talk about. Then it's all about your note-taking skills to put everything on paper so that you don't stop in the middle to think about what you want to say. For this part, you can do what I always recommend to my students. I use something that I call the arrow method. It's basically a simplified flowchart. You write just one word or a short phrase for each sentence or point you want to make, and nothing more. You use arrows to move on to the next one. This will help you to do this part as fast as possible, and since it's a linear process, you'll find it easy to follow while speaking. Now, Let's try to talk about the topic we have. So basically, I have the questions in my head. Now I need to either make up a story or remember one. You don't have to tell a true story. Examiners don't care about such things. They assess your speaking only based on the language you use and the logic behind your points. Does it make sense? Is it coherent? This arrow method might take a while for you to get used to, but through practice, you'll speed up. Remember only one word or a short phrase for a point so that you remember what you were going to say, no more. Now, let's turn these into a full story. I'd like to talk about a time when I lost my car key and I had to look for it for a week. It was 4 years ago and I was getting ready to set off to work. I was already late, so I was in a rush. But you know what happens when you are in that situation? Everything goes wrong, and that's exactly what happened. I looked everywhere but couldn't find it. Finally, I decided to call an Uber. I remember that day all I could think about at work was that key, and for the life of me I couldn't figure out where I'd put it. Anyway, when I returned, I asked all my family members to help me find it, and this went on for a week. In fact, it got to a point where they began to feel sick of constantly looking for something that couldn't be found. Eventually I gave up. I thought I had lost it somewhere on the street, so I decided to make a new one, which I knew would cost a fortune. But you know what happened the day I gave up? I found it under the sack of our dog food. While I was filling our dog's bowl, I noticed a piece of metal sticking out from under the sack. There it was, my car key. I'm not sure if I accidentally dropped it while placing the sack there, or if our dog found it amusing to hide the key. Regardless of the reason, I was over the moon when I spotted it. To be honest, that was the happiest I had felt in a long time. But I learned my lesson. I don't want to go through the same experience ever again. Now, several times a day, I check if my key is in my pocket. I also make sure I put it in our new bowl for keys when I arrive home. This will help me limit the search area if I ever lose it again. You know, losing your keys is inevitable, so the next time it happens, I'll just think about the last time I checked and only search the areas I've been after that time. It'll actually help me find it much faster. As you can see, this way you can speak for 2 minutes non-stop. I may have spoken for over 2 minutes here, but the examiner is going to interrupt you once the 2-minute mark is reached. But that won't be a problem at all. Examiners interrupting you has nothing to do with your score. They just want to move on, that's all. Another thing I should mention is, you might be able to cover all my points in less than 2 minutes. Different people speak at different speed, so make sure in your practice you figure out how much detail you need to match your speed. Because as a rule of thumb, you need to speak for at least 1 minute and 40 seconds to be able to give the examiner enough to rate. That said, there are some questions here. Number 1. What if I run out of points too early? Well, in this case, the examiner will give you a few seconds to think of more stuff. You can think of more relevant questions to cover, but do not start to throw short random points, because you'll have more hesitations and maybe mistakes if you say whatever that comes to your mind before thinking about it. This is why you need to practice with as many topics as you can before the test, so that you get used to speaking at length. Number 2. The examiner asked me a question about my story before part 3, and then he interrupted me before I could extend my point. Is it a bad sign? Not at all. It's just a transitional question to ease into part 3. As long as you directly answer the question, you shouldn't worry about examiner interrupting you. Now, once again, in part 2, remember, as long as you talk about the main topic at hand, you can make up your own bullet points, talking about the lessons learned, consequences, future plans about the situation, and things like that will actually help you with idea generation, timing, and the range of structures you use, all required for a high band score. Now, after this, the examiner will ease into part 3, which is all about follow-up questions about your part 2 topic. The questions will be general and not personal, so your answers should be about people in general too, not your life. The difficulty of the questions might increase as you go on, depending on your level. Your answers need to be well developed, as this part is about in-depth discussion. Let's take a look at a few questions. Why do people lose things? To answer these questions and generate ideas faster, think of it as a discussion you are having with your friend. Or what would an average person say if they were asked this question on the street by a reporter? The most common answers might be because people are busy these days, so they are more forgetful, or things like this. Here is a simple answer. It might be because of the hectic lifestyle many people have these days. When you have too much on your mind, the brain just prioritizes the most important things and may not pay attention to trivial ones. That said, some people are just careless, so they lose even more important things like their wallets all the time. They simply don't care. Now, you might be asked a question that you talked about in part 2. But the only thing that you need to do is extend it. This shows flexibility when it comes to using the language. For example, the examiner might ask the following question that I have already covered to some extent in part 2. How can people prevent losing things? As I mentioned earlier, coming up with a preventive measure that helps you pay more attention to items is the way to go. For example, the bowl for keys I talked about is something you need to do and think about as soon as you get home. This helps your brain put a higher priority on that item. But generally speaking, being more organized is important. If you put away all your items in a fixed place, you'll have a much lower chance of losing them. Now you have a pretty good idea about what you can expect in each part of the speaking test and how you should answer the questions. But let's talk about a few more frequently asked questions. Number 1. Does my body language or facial expression matter? Should I make eye contact? No, there is nothing mentioned about these in the band descriptors. You are only assessed for your speaking, that's all. You don't have to make eye contact either. Number 2. Can I memorize answers for a wide range of topics and use them in the exam? This won't work because examiners are trained to spot memorized answers. So if you do that, you'll be penalized. Number 3. The examiner wrote some numbers while I was speaking. Are those related to my score? No, they are usually time related, nothing to do with your score. The examiners won't rate your speaking while you're in the room. Number 4. My examiner looked intimidating. Does that mean they didn't like my speaking? No, some examiners smile, some don't. It doesn't matter. You only need to focus on answering the questions, that's all. Remember that the more you use the language, the easier it will be for you to speak, which helps your fluency. It is also a good idea to have your speaking checked by a qualified IELTS expert. On ESLFluency.com, we provide live speaking mock sessions with detailed written feedback reports. They include Q&A about the test, a full-timed and recorded mock test, an oral brief feedback report right after the test, and a detailed written feedback report within 48 hours after the session is over. With the level of depth you'll receive in the report, you'll know your estimated band score and all the areas you should work on. That's it, everyone. Thank you for watching. In our future videos, we're going to talk about other criteria in the band descriptors for IELTS speaking. So, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe for more. See you in the next one.